Let's learn about API Gateway. So from your AWS console home, go ahead and type in API Gateway and select that. And by default, you'll see a list of any APIs that you have already created. Now, an API is a URL that is typically visited by not humans, but computers in order to exchange data. So, for example, if I had a web page with a list of friends or something like that in it, imagine that you're looking at maybe Facebook and you see your list of friends, you would use an API to, if you were the Facebook developer, to go out there and retrieve the list of friends, have that list be in a JSON object, and then display it using JavaScript on your page. Anyway, long and short of it is you get access to data typically through APIs. Let's go ahead and first create an API. And here you see a few different options. You see REST API private, REST API, WebSocket API, and HTTP API. Notice that you can build REST APIs with this particular service that's listed right here. It turns out that HTTP API is the newer version of REST API. And WebSocket API is used for real-time communications, like when you have a chat application or something like that. In this case, we want to create a REST API that's not synchronous, like at the same time, real time. We want it where you can send in a response and then get back a response. So let's go ahead and use this first one. And the first thing it says is, while you're doing this, is create an integration. And what that means is, where is it that you want to send the data that comes into this API? That's what you're integrating with, is the backend service. And maybe before that, I'll just give this guy a name. And I'll just say hello world. And hopefully I haven't used that already. All right, I'm going to click integration. And it says, hey, do you have any existing either websites you'd like to connect to? And we'll, in that case, you'd just be a proxy between two different websites. Yours and theirs, right? And then, or you can have your Lambda function be the thing that gets data sent to it from this API's URL, and then we'll send back data to this API, and then subsequently to the client that requested data. I'm going to click on Lambda and look through my list, and I think I have a function that just simply prints out a list of donuts, predefined donuts in an array. We'll check out later on what that looks like. But I just have a hello world app that basically returns a list of donuts. I'm going to click next. And right here is where I can configure routes. Now, the idea is that when you're using an API is that it has some format like this up until like you end with like essentially the .com. And then anything after that is considered to be a resource path. And you can configure lots of different resource paths and send them to different backend targets. So let's just say, I don't know, if people typed in hello world, I could have them go to, and I didn't set this up yet. I could fix this later after the first time I go through this wizard. But what I could do is I could set up a whole bunch of different resource paths here and have them each go to different Lambda functions on the back end. Commonly, what you might do is have for example, a get method, an HTTP just regular visit from like a web page or something like that. Maybe have that go to a Lambda function that reads some information, and then maybe if you have a put or a post where you're uploading some information, you might send that to the exact same resource path. So that looks weird, right? Actually, let me just go ahead and just write it this way. Copy, paste. And then this one, and then in that case, you would have a different Lambda function, and maybe this one says add data. So if this one maybe is read donut list, if I had like a more fully fleshed API, and this would be add donut to list or something like that. So in this case, I don't need a bunch of different stuff. Actually, just for giggles, I'll set up a couple different paths. And I'll say all donuts. So basically, both of these URLs are going to go to the exact same thing when all is said and done. Okay, next step. First time through this, you don't need to set up extra stuff. But the idea is that over time, you would have a stable URL for your API that is maybe for production, and then you could add in some other URLs with some slightly different information that would represent your production, or your development, or maybe a testing API, which is slightly different. And then with some extra configuration, you can make it so that your maybe your testing and your development API URLs go to different routes, which makes sense. Leave the production ones being used as is, and then develop on the other ones. And at the appropriate time, maybe move the development into a production role. For the first time you do this, you just leave the default name there and you're fine. This says review and then create. And so we do that, and then we wait just a moment. And in theory, we should be able to see the data that's returned by the Lambda function on the back end. And just for giggles, let's go ahead and find that Lambda function. And I'm going to go over here to my function list, and there's my daily donut list. I just want to verify what that looks like. All this thing did was create a list of donuts in an array, and then it responds by returning that array to whatever calls it. Okay. And actually, I have an alternative way to get to this thing, so I can verify that it does work. So this was my quick and dirty API, and that works using the function URL approach. But these quick and dirty versions of your API using the function URL, they lack a lot of different features that are important when you're offering an API to a wide audience. For example, authentication so that only authorized users can use it, or throttling so that some of your users don't use too much of this. Oftentimes when you have an API that's quasi-public, you're charging people for access to your API. So for example, if you're an Airbnb or maybe Uber, they need to call out to other services, and they're paying for access to those services to get that data. And you could be that provider, right? So anyway, API Gateway is a much more fully fledged and fleshed out way of providing APIs that have lots of different routes at a given URL. Anyway, we know that this thing should work if we get it configured correctly. Let's see what happens if we click on this invoke URL. So I click on it and it says message not found. Now, unlike the function URL that was available as part of the Lambda itself, the Lambda function, when you access URLs via API Gateway, you're supposed to add in the path that goes along with that. So this is kind of your initial part of your API, but you need to add in one of many routes and paths associated with those routes. So if I come over here to routes, I can see that all donuts is one of the possibilities. So I will go ahead and type that in. And there we go. There's all of the data that I wanted. Now, if I wanted to embed this information or call this information from a web page rather than this URL directly, I would note that you have to enable something called CORS, and CORS enables this API to be called from a different domain than this one listed right here. So if we come back over here and we go to CORS and we click on configure, add a star, click add, and then click save. This would now be an API that I can call or use in any page on the internet.